Clay is an incredibly plastic and malleable medium. And up until this point, we focused on making our pieces clean and getting rid of all the byproducts of the forming process. But we can also take advantage of clay's susceptibility to texture in a variety of ways. Almost anything that can be pressed into clay can be used to create texture in the surface. And our textured tile project is designed to give you a chance to play with texture on the clay surface so that you have a chance to explore different color combinations, different texture combinations, and see what appeals to you before we start more complicated projects involving texture, like our textured platter form and our textured cylinder form. We're going to start by rolling out a slab of clay, same way we did with our other tile project, except we don't need to be as concerned about the tiles remaining flat. We can roll it out right on the canvas. We don't have to do the board sandwich. Start with brown guide sticks first, move up to the blue guide sticks. We don't want to go much thinner than that because we're impressing into the clay, and that's going to displace some of that clay, and we don't want our texture to go right through unless that's our actual intention. Now, as we said before, almost anything can be used to texture clay. Organic material, stone, plant life, leaves, sticks, nuts, berries, almost any of this can be used to leave impressions in the clay. The thinner the impression is, the more subtle it is, and that's things you can use to your advantage. Found objects, metal, fabric, some of these need to be gently rolled into the clay, especially if they're very stiff. And sometimes, especially if the item is not porous, meaning it doesn't absorb moisture, it may stick a little bit, so you have to be a little bit gentle pulling it up. Wood is porous and makes excellent texturing tools. These happen to be pieces of decorative molding that I found, and those can be just pressed directly into the clay. And there's many varieties of sizes and shapes. And this is a time for you to explore many different options. If something doesn't appeal to you, you can always recycle that clay and start with a fresh new slab. Clay itself can even be a form of texture. If you were to carve a design into leather hard clay, once that's fired, that could be pressed into the clay and used as texture. When you're using clay stamps, firm pressure will often help that clay suck up into those stamp recesses. Or found objects pressed into clay. This one happens to be a matchbox car. That can form a textured impression as well. Once again, firm pressure helps that clay suck up into that texture. Many different images appeal to many different people. Another possibility is taking any flat object, a wood, piece of commercial tile, and drawing with glue or hot glue on the surface. Once that's dry, that can be pressed into clay to form a textural relief. And if you find a thicker object that you like, and we make a clay stamp out of that, what you may need to do is fill the recesses of that stamp with clay, pressing firmly to make sure You get it all the way down in there. And then if we press that down onto the clay, using a good amount of pressure, we can usually get that to release right on to the clay. If it's very thick texture, scratching and scoring is always helpful. Now once you've got your slab textured the way you want it, we're going to take what's called an edit window. And this is very similar to the tile pattern we used for a 6-inch tile, except instead of tracing the outside, we're going to trace the inside to cut out our tile. And this gives us a chance to look around and see what portions of this might be particularly appealing to us. I think I like that one right there. And just like we did with our 6-inch tile, we're going to take our knife tool, trace around the inside edge. Remember to hold your knife blade vertically. You don't want to bend it to either side because we don't want to undercut our tile. If you have more room on your slab, you may find another place that appeals to me. I like this little frog over here, so we'll make sure we get him in too. Now you're going to make a total of 4 texture tiles. You can make more if this appeals to you. By all means, go ahead. And we're just going to take away this excess clay. Go ahead and run your finger along the edge just so we don't have those sharp edges again. And these can be picked up, set on a wear board to get leather hard. Once they're leather hard, you can go ahead and do any other refinement you need to if there's some sanding that needs to be done or to clean up those edges. Once they're bone dry, you can sand the bottom edges of the tile and then set them back to dry. I'm just going to make a couple more, show you some of the other possibilities. Another thing that we can do, fabric often makes really nice textures if you find one that has a good heavy weave. This one actually happens to be shelf liner that I happen to find. Plastic canvas is another interesting texture that can be used. And what can be really interesting is if you have a geometric pattern, if we take the clay and by slapping it on the table and stretching it, we can get those patterns to move around and change. And sometimes we can find some really interesting spots in there. And you can stretch the clay at any point. You can add more texture, stretch it farther. Your clay will get progressively thinner as you do this, and that's okay. And don't be afraid to overlap textures as well. You can apply one texture over top of another, and you can get interesting effects from that as well. Kind of like this one here. And don't feel that your clay has to completely fill the edit window. If this negative space here appeals to you, by all means that can be part of your composition as well. You're looking to find what is interesting for you. Once again, running your fingers along the edges just to make sure that's all cleaned up. We'll go ahead